Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nicole Ciccolo, head of the communication area for the research project called Project Aten. We welcome all accredited Italian press present here and all the press connected remotely. This is a special press conference to exclusively reveal the results of an absolutely innovative and revolutionary study made possible by the collaboration of a team of researchers who have combined their specific historical, archaeological, scientific, and technological expertise. In particular, Professor Corrado Malanga, researcher and head of the research project, engineer Filippo Biondi, specialist in SAR technology, and Dr. Armando May, expert in Egyptology. Thanks to SAR technology, or synthetic aperture radar, combined with the new Doppler tomography methodology, the research group present here has made a series of unprecedented discoveries located beneath the Lisa plain. This technological innovation involves converting photonic radar information into phononic signals. This would allow for the exploration of structures buried deep beneath the Earth's surface.
To talk about the research we have done, it is an innovative field. It actually started several years ago when we began working on the Cheops pyramid, as it is called by experts. And from that perspective, we started writing scientific papers and books. They talked about what we found with synthetic aperture radar. Synthetic aperture radar is a technique that involves using a radar placed about 680 kilometers high in orbit around a planet, which transforms photonic signals into phononic signals. It transforms light into sound, into vibration. So what we can see is a sound image of the things we are looking at. This technique allows us to look inside things. As you know, photons, light stops in front of money, but sound does not. Granite has a sound speed of about 4,000 meters per second. Water, 1,400 meters. Air, 340 meters per second. So if we can't transform light into sound, what will appear to us is that granite is more transparent than glass. This allows us to see inside ancient monuments, like the 3 pyramids of the Giza plateau, without moving a stone. By taking a closer look at the structure of these machines, we clearly realize, and you see these machines, 2 of them, but in reality, there are actually 52 in front, 2 behind, and 1 in the middle. The spots are similar to the same spots we recorded in one in particular, in the Pyramid of It's a Zen, a structure. Essentially, we had already seen it in the pyramid we had analyzed before. There are 5 of these structures now. Tomorrow, in the plenary conference, we will show how we arrived at these results. Why? Because with the radar, we can take several tomographies by looking at the scene from multiple viewpoints and thus build a 3-dimensional image, perfectly reconstructing stone by stone everything we see. A single tomography is not enough. This image alone would not be sufficient to solve the problem, which we will later show you with the construction of a 3-dimensional model. This is an image taken from another point of view. You need to have the same objects, places, from a different angle, and the awareness of these images must enter within us. This can only be done by looking at these images for hours and hours, going back to review the old tomographies, reviewing the new ones, trying to identify every structure in a 3-dimensional way. At this point, we were able to finally construct a 3-dimensional model of our research, and we immediately realized, tomorrow we will understand it better because we will show piece by piece how we arrived at these results, which, in the Pyramid of Khafre until the day before yesterday, Egyptologists said there was nothing. Basically, a hollow stone mountain. There are a lot of things. There are 5 chambers, 5 places in a certain position, connected to each other by probable paths, which could actually be corridors. But what we see is that below this structure, there are 8 vertical shafts, surrounded by something that resembles a kind of, forgive the term, spiral staircase. You see them here from another angle, from another point of view. You see them here again from another point of view. Look at how much stuff is in there. How many paths can be taken? There are 2 rooms in particular, one you see large on the right in the back, and the other smaller on the left at the end, which appear in the different tomographies and are definitely something that resembles rooms. Look at how it appears in front of us and these wells. Vertical wells that go down to a certain distance, depth. These vertical wells, as we can see from the tomographies, will appear very, very clear, showing how deep this stuff goes. The attempt was to understand this. We placed a kind of plane simulating a water path, because indeed below a certain height, let's say ground zero of the pyramid, there is water. Below the water path, there is still more stuff, and we go down until we find two structures of this kind that, when you look at them for the first time, you can't understand what they are. They are actually two big boxes, two giant boxes, which we will later discover are about, with dimensions of 80 meters on each side, two boxes of 80 meters on each side. It's not a phenomenon of pareidolia as one might imagine, but it's the computer itself telling us, look, the boxes are made like this, and the computer, with its analyses and the help of artificial intelligence, reconstructs these two boxes as you can see here,
in which 4 tubes enter each box from the top and descend downward. We are at a depth of 648 meters, only at this level, 648 meters. Let's look at how they appeared in our tomography. The tubes you see here, there are 8, arranged in, let's say, 2 rows.
in the center of the long side of the pyramid, and you can clearly see that they are surrounded by something that looks like a spiral staircase going down. We have essentially reconstructed this spiral staircase, like this. See? There are 2 boxes in which, in each box, 8 tubes go down to 648 meters, 4 on one side and 4 on the other.
We are at 648 meters. What happens next? We realize that by using this technique, synthetic aperture radar, we not only found a lot of stuff in the pyramid of Khafre that no one had ever seen before, but by zooming out a bit, we saw there was more stuff underneath, so we had to zoom out even further.
And in a tomography that we will see tomorrow, piece by piece, you can see inside at the middle of this gigantic tomography. You see the pyramid of Khafre at the top. On the left, hidden by the gray tones of the tomography, there is the small pyramid, which is the smallest pyramid of the full complex, while actually on the right, invisible, there is the pyramid of...
You have to keep in mind that when we do a tomography and cut a cake, this cake has been cut in half of the pyramid of Khafre in half. The photographic plate that comes out, since it has the information of the vibration, not only is affected by all the pixels, all the points that are within the vibration of the plate, but also by everything that is in front and everything that is behind, thus creating an image that at the beginning of the work is difficult to understand, but later allows you to understand a fundamental thing. Look, let's just take the central part of this tomography. What we see is that below the central triangle, which represents the 2 sides of the pyramid of Khafre, at about 640 meters, there are these square boxes, this luminous plane, which contains the 2 boxes I showed you earlier, where you can glimpse them with this type of response.
Even the channels that go down, which you can only guess here because I showed them to you in the previous tomography. The problem is there more stuff underneath? It goes down another 600 meters, and this allows us to understand that there's a whole world down there, a world made up of many things. For example, here we are below the plane, below the pyramid of Cheops. And what is all this stuff here? All this luminous, vibrating stuff? When we go and we'll show it tomorrow, some magnifications, we'll discover that underneath there's a real quote-unquote city. We're at a depth of about 1,000 to 200 meters. How do we calculate this? It is not known. A pixel is X centimeters long. So we just need to take the number of pixels provided by the computer and we know exactly what we are looking at. Tomorrow we will also show how the human eye would see these things if it were technically placed on the satellite. I remind you that we used 2 satellites, not just 1. So the 2 satellites give us completely consistent responses. Therefore, anything that could be a sound reflection we can identify perfectly because it's a sound reflection that we see on one satellite but not on the other, as the other satellite is in a different position and thus sees things in a completely different way. Another thing to highlight? In our research, the 2 satellites we used, which are Capella Space and Umbra Space, provide us with the data for free. Anyone can access this data. Just go to the website of these two providers and download the data. So this research didn't cost anything. I mention this because compared to other methodologies, these other methodologies can be used to look inside the pyramids, like the muon methodology. That is, muons are particles that fill the universe. They irradiate the pyramids, and if I place a camera with a photographic plate for muons under the pyramid, I can see how the photographic plate gets exposed. A camera for muons costs between 1,000 and 800,000. To take a photograph, it takes 8 months. And in this context, about 10 to 15 university institutes around the world have been involved with a project called SCAN that employs 30 people working on it. So it takes quite a bit of time. We, on the other hand, did it from home without needing the camera. That, keep in mind, requires placing a photographic plate under the material, so you have to go there personally. Instead, we solved the problem by looking at everything from above, making everything transparent. A stone, a granite, and I'll say it again, is more transparent than glass from this point of view. Essentially, while our research lasts a year, a few months, basically the time to verify all the dozens and dozens of photographs taken by multiple satellites, machine time is necessary to perform the Fourier transform accumulations. It is said that all these things are certainly not the spirits. The money, the technology, the people needed to discover a tenth of what we discover with this technology. So this is an innovative technology that allows us to look inside ancient monuments without going there, without moving a stone, thus preserving this heritage,
without altering its shape and structure. At this point, there are a whole series of issues that we will better understand tomorrow, because tomorrow we will follow a path as if everyone had participated in this research and everyone, piece by piece, had understood. Every type of stone of the thing we studied can be seen clearly.
Well, the problem is, so this research, in this context at this moment, what does it produce as a partial result? Because it's obviously not finished yet. The result is this. There are some things. You see, this research doesn't need to be proven. It's not like we have to wait for other types of work or other scientists to declare it true, because these are photographs. And I photographed the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it's not like 500 more people need to photograph it to confirm that it exists. So this research as it stands assumes that these data are real. But what does this mean? It means that someone built something at a depth of 1,200 meters. Egyptian. Do we want to believe that it was still the ancient Egyptians? If we want to ask you, you must believe. Let's believe it with the final act. But the problem is that these are the questions we are now facing. Tomorrow, we will just show things as they are, and we will send home the people who come to this conference, asking them to respond, to make hypotheses about what we found, because what we found is what we found. But who built it? When it was built? For whom it was built? What was its purpose? These are answers that we won't give tomorrow, but that we will have the duty to provide in future meetings, in future conferences. In the meantime, the need to carry on with this study is evident. Why? Because it seems to me that history needs to be documented, and this will indeed be our goal. The Giza Plateau must be fully scanned to see exactly what lies beneath. And everything that now appears as mere shapes will soon take on a more precise form. And at that point, it will be necessary for those responsible to become aware that it's time to start digging to see what's underneath. As far as we know, these natural cavities have very specific shapes and tomographies that show a geometry. This completely rules out the possibility that they are of natural origin. Consider, for example, these wells, right? These wells have this kind of, let's call it a spiral staircase that winds around them. And the brightness of this luminous path has the characteristic of being reconstructed by computer. And it's not always the same brightness, because the radar treats these paths as if they were made of glass, meaning it sees both the front and the back. And when this luminous thing rotates around and turns the other way, its light frequency, that is, its vibration, changes and changes with 3 different degrees of brightness, making it clear that these wells are actually tubes, meaning there's emptiness inside. And they are all identical, making it very unlikely that they were made by. It is clear that at this point the need to go and see in person, to move some stones, is fundamental, because only by looking inside will we discover what is inside. It's like opening an Easter egg. We found the Easter egg, let's go see the surprise. But we already know there's a surprise. As you can see, I'll show you the 3D construction again. You can clearly understand how the 3D model exactly reconstructs what we see from a tomography. Tomorrow, I'll show you 10 tomographies from 10 different viewpoints where these wells are clearly visible in all their essence. Consider that these wells essentially have a wall diameter of 1,012 meters. It is a depth of at least 648 meters. One working hypothesis is that some of these structures serve to support the pyramid because we have done static calculations and found that the Pyramid of Khafre weighs a lot, and to keep it up it needs a base, otherwise it would sink into the sand, it would settle.
The calculations show that over thousands of years, these structures have sunk by about half a meter. The builders evidently foresaw that you can't build a pyramid on sand, so it's necessary to construct pillars underneath that somehow reach down to the granite at the bottom and support a plate, which we will show tomorrow, that supports the structure on which the pyramid was built.
Ask a question, please. But if there are structures 1,200 meters underground here, if I remember correctly, 12,000 years ago, the water was 120 meters lower than the aquifers, so we are still in another historical era, because we are fundamentally a kilometer below. Basically, yes, in fact, who says that the pyramids were built 20,500 years before Christ? This is a question mark, and this hypothesis is becoming increasingly less credible. This allows us to make a certain number of simple observations. If the pyramids were actually built, as they say, we have to remember that 4,500 to 6,000 years ago, 20,500 years before Christ, essentially, the ancient Egyptians didn't have the wheel. They didn't have writing. They didn't know how to write. They didn't have the lever. They didn't know how to cut stone. And how would they have managed to build something that goes down 1,200 meters underground, along with the whole setup of the Giza Plateau? How did they move the stones, each of which in the Pyramid of Khufu weighs 70 tons? Well, there are some who say, oh no, just add more men. But if 10 men aren't enough, I'll put 20. And we need to make these people understand that putting 20 men around a stone that's 3 meters long might not be easy. But we need to make these people understand that they need to understand. And that's the hardest part. The last 3 years of the pandemic have made us understand this. For example, that it's not such a simple thing. So we must start thinking that the true Giza Plateau didn't see the light 4,500 years ago, but much earlier. I wanted to ask what led you to believe that these underground structures correspond to the halls of Revis? And have you considered the hypothesis that all this stuff might be a big something related to chemical reactions or the possibility of extracting material from the underground? An industrial complex. Yes, I can answer if you want, sure. Our idea starts from an observation. History is historicist, meaning that those who write history books always have an interest in presenting an idea that makes history appear a certain way. Myth, on the other hand, is not historicist. Myth represents the reality of events. In a single frame, myth encapsulates the past, present, and future. In that moment, the myth must be taken into consideration. It must be reevaluated. And in the myth, it is written, there are somewhere halls called Salvia, which contain, some say books, others go further, we don't know, but where there's smoke, there's always a bit of fire. This is the idea that made us think that these large structures had something to do with what is written in the book. Then, at this moment, we believe that these 8 wells, which recent tomography has revealed to be also under the Pyramid of Cheops, and which we hadn't seen at the time of the analysis, because obviously we didn't have the awareness, so we didn't look under the Pyramid of Cheops with the right perspective, but now and tomorrow we will show you. We realized that by doing a series of distant tomographies even under the other two pyramids, and if these columns are needed to maintain the stability of these pyramids, we would also need them under the pyramid of Khufu and under the pyramid of Menkaure, necessarily, but not Eno right now. We believe that they not only served to create the stability of these large monuments, but also had at least two or maybe three other purposes. I won't go into detail for now because it would be speculative, but clearly when we have the chance to understand better or to go see this stuff in person, then maybe we'll understand. That back then there was a technology that we still don't understand. Our idea is essentially based on the fact that the ancients, whoever they were, had a strong awareness and understanding of what phonon physics is, not photon physics, that is the electromagnetic field. We are fixated on photons, on light, Maxwell, fine. These people, in my humble opinion, knew how to work on liberations. In fact, in our early works, specifically in the published work on motosensing, we mention this, attributing it to the structure of the Pyramid of Cheops. The functioning of an infrasonic machine, which moving with the wind, would produce through those structures, you've seen them here, 5 placed practically in series and parallel, a certain vibration that would heal the pharaoh or whoever was in his place. And here too, not only in Egyptian myth, but in the ancient myths from all over the world, it is written how the ancients used sound to heal. Clearly, if we want to consider the myth a joke, then we can do that. But faced with the calculations we have done, we have seen that perhaps there are numbers that have a particular precision. People think that the ancient Egyptians didn't know the Pythagorean theorem. Not only did the ancient Egyptians know the Pythagorean theorem, but they also built a pyramid with it. Because if you don't know the Pythagorean theorem, you can't build a pyramid properly. And when you do the correct calculations, the real ones, you discover that the Pyramid of Khafre, like the Pyramid of Khufu, is built not only on 3.14159 and not on 3.16, as some say, an approximation of the term, but also on 1.6180339, which is the golden ratio precisely. This essentially means that the mathematics of the ancient builders of these monuments involved a series of understandings and awareness that we today believe the ancient Egyptians did not have, but it seems they actually did. They had it. I can continue. I ask this because some of the internal structures, the pyramids, resemble reactors, reaction chambers. Given something that was used on a human level, that is for people. The idea I got from being inside was that it was something meant for a fluid, I don't know, but not so much to create a... So the important thing is to make hypotheses, because scientific research must be approached by making hypotheses. If you don't make hypotheses, you don't know what to look for, right? Then the hypotheses must be validated by measurements. Right now, we are not able to say what the purpose of this entire structure is without making hypotheses. However, we can say with absolute certainty that these structures exist. They are not random, and someone put them there. From there, we can then go on to make all the wild speculations we want, but that stuff is there, and someone put it there.
The scientific method is crucial because it relies on the repeatability of experiments. So, from my point of view, there is no alternative research or superior research, therefore there isn't. Of research, so you don't have an alternative research. Research says, from my point of view. So what we applied is the least. We took this from different manufacturing, meaning they were built by different factories, 2 different companies. We processed the data from both. The same things came out. Regarding the measurement of the depth, actually I have to say that we took a bit of courage to provide the data of 1 kilometer. We did the impossible. We measured the levels, cut here, cut there, asked the artificial intelligence just in case. We had the artificial intelligence redo the calculations, and it came to the same results as ours. So I can't be certain. As a scientist, I can't just say, no, it's definitely this way, because that would be foolish. But it's 99% likely. That is, they would make verified products that go down to a depth of 1 kilometer and 2, 1 kilometer and 4, We need to look closely. The range is from 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers and 44 with intermediate boxes. And further down, there are large cavities that can be seen. We measure them, and so this will be the future. As you have seen, there are many structures that feature right-angle singularities, so the boxes are visible. Nature is very good, right? Nature is excellent at generating natural cavities, but the right angle seems like something that could be made by someone else. That is, by people who calculate length, height, and depth. I forgot what it is. Same material. So to do this, I can't give you an answer because to do this, you need to perform what's called spectroscopy. It can be done, but I need you for that. So I had to do tomographies at different frequencies, creating a so-called database. Frequency dictionary varying with the material and then providing an answer. Like, as you can see, the seriousness of those who are here, let's say from the research side, is that where they can't answer, they say, I don't know, but still it's where it shines and is subsonic. Where it shines a bit less because there's the background, the so-called contrast material, maybe there's water, okay? It's less bright or even dark, right? So where there is something shiny, and especially if this something is shining, sorry if I dwell on this, but how can you see the shine from the wells to reach the surface? Because we take the data from spectroscopic analysis from the surface, it has to be connected to the surface. Otherwise, you wouldn't know if it's isolated. There, if there were vibration, it remains confined below, and we from above do not extract the information. This is important.
Surely this research, the results we are obtaining are extremely important because they also confirm the pre-existence of a city that existed on this planet in ancient times. Some time ago I proposed a revision, let's say, of the dating of the Giza plain, also due to a series of documents that are considered of little interest, but which, with the progress of this research, are taking on an increasingly significant value. I'm referring, for example, to the word amenti, because this is to answer Thomas, who asked a specific question about why. So this question as well, but also, for example, the chronology of the royal canon, the myths that are told in the Book of the Dead. In short, there are a whole series of references that suggest a pre-existence, which is somewhat determined in 36,400, which is also in line with these documents. This work we are doing is absolutely relevant because it establishes a whole series of conditions that until today seem to be, somewhat mythical. As for the consideration of the association of this discovery with the city in addition to what the professor has perfectly specified, there are some elements emerging from the reconstruction of what we're identifying beneath the surface, which seem to be consistent with some descriptions we find in the Amenti. Earlier I mentioned the Amenti tables, where there are precise references to these wells that go deep, which were built. The text talks about the light bringers. We don't know who they are, but the objective fact remains of the presence of these wells. Just like the boxes that are dated to the first, which are described in these times as rooms with the size of space. So just to emphasize how enormous these halls were, and additionally there's another reference to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, particularly chapter 149, where there is a somewhat vague description of these halls. In fact, it mentions 14 residences, but only some of them are described with seemingly precise characteristics based on the reconstruction. They leave us, so to speak, they give us a relative certainty that we're talking about my hypothesis, which, however, is validated from a historical point of view.
About 13,500 years ago, following a cataclysmic event of which we have almost all the information today, which has been reproduced by scientific works, measured roughly around 13,500 years ago, we have what we call that is an object or multiple objects fell on our planet, also altering the Earth's axis. In that context, some scholars argue that the water level of the plain rose by 100 meters. And we find traces of this because inside the Pyramid of Cheops, 2 centimeters of sea salt were found stuck to all the walls. Sea salt that was removed by the Hawass crew when they cleaned the pyramids. It is evident that seawater entered the pyramids and then evaporated slowly, Otherwise, you wouldn't find 2 centimeters of crystallized salt. This makes me think that 13,500 years ago, the pyramid was already functioning, and then it stopped functioning because it would have been unusable afterward. So the idea I've formed is that this stuff was used before the cataclysms, and then those who remained there, the survivors, let's say a few hundred years later, returning to that place, restored it, as it is written somewhere, the Pyramid of Cheops. They didn't build it, but they restored it. And then, however, I don't know what they did with it or how they used it. Surely it wasn't the use intended by those who built it. My thought is that mainstream Egyptologists will never change because one of the characteristics of being human is stubbornness. So there are many Egyptologists who, being human, have written books and had the opportunity to present theories. And maybe before dying, what do? You prove that what you had written was all wrong. Human beings are not very capable on a conscious level of admitting they might have been wrong. I live in another world. I live in a world where consciousness is the important thing, not the length of your department's desk. In this context, we know that consciousness is used to interpret tomographies, because through consciousness we have introduced a fundamental parameter which is the human perception of what is in front of them. So in this context, my personal experience is that I have only learned in life when I have failed. That is, only when I have made mistakes, because when one never makes mistakes. Or anyway, they wouldn't need to learn. So from this point of view, I would say to mainstream Egyptologists, as we have called them, the so-called official science doesn't exist. There is just science. There are some scientists who are a bit more aware and some who are a bit less, but it essentially depends on the level of awareness one has. I would say, what are the chances that a scientist with this mentality, with this type, but the scientist might change a bit? A scientist? Maybe a scientist is something else. The ability to change one's mind is there. We've seen it even recently in the last 3 years of the pandemic. People haven't changed their minds, despite having written a ton of nonsense. So I wonder why. Because changing one's mind is like saying, but I wasn't wrong. But here, the moment I say I was wrong, I'm happy to have been wrong because I learned. Most human beings, on the other hand, are not happy to have been wrong because they think they made a bad choice.